Hello and welcome to the Game of Growth podcast. My name is Cassidy-Rice.
And I'm John Cassidy-Rice.
And today we're going to be talking about meaning.
Meaning, the meaning of life.
Yes, but before we get there, before we get to the meaning of life, we are going to go over our wins of the week.
Absolutely. So what was your win of the week?
So my win of the week this week was I've been waiting on some registration in the UK and finally got my HDPC registration, which means the protected title sports psychologist is something that I can use now. So I can now refer to myself as a sports psychologist in the UK.
So you're a doctor and as a sports psychologist. How do I now refer to you?
You can call me whatever you like.
Okay. I shall be polite.
What was your win of the week?
My win of the week. I've been working on a piece of software as a LearnDash LMS, which is a plugin for WordPress, and putting a course together. And what we wanted it to do was to stop the student at a certain point, and so they would have to refer and get some feedback from a live person. And man, although it could do it, it was a real struggle. It took 3 days of working on it, but I got there. Totally counterintuitive way of doing it, but it works now. So that was a big relief.
Awesome.
So what we've been doing is exploring positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So we're on meaning. So what does meaning mean to you? That was a really corny line, wasn't it?
So within the scope of the PERMA model, meaning refers to having a value and purpose in life. So this is going to be different for everyone, but it might be the work that you do, it might be volunteering that you do, it could be a hobby, having something in your life that you really value and feel like you're serving a greater purpose.
And I know, and it sounds almost cliched. It sounds like there's a lot of sort of wishy-washy work around purpose and finding your purpose, etc. But it really does make a difference, because when you see somebody with purpose, they have energy, vitality, they're involved in life. So I would suggest, and do challenge me on this, is that purpose, often people think they need to find their purpose and that it's going to magically appear one day. They're going to wake up and go, I have purpose. Agree or disagree?
I've seen it before. Yes.
But I think really first that it comes from commitment. So you commit to something, whether it's committing to a new job and building a business, a hobby, a profession, something. So you can get someone who's into sports, and then once they committed to the sports, the purpose evolves over time. That was my thinking around that.
Yeah, I would take that a step further and not just say commitment, but also in an area that you're utilizing your strengths. So within positive psychology, a lot of our discussion has been around strengths-based approaches, and that fits into the PERMA model. But particularly within the meaning, and you just spoke around commitment, is that something that you're able to use your strength within? Because I can tell you I can commit to a lot of things.
Yes.
That they might not be my strengths. So I might not develop that extra level of feeling that I'm committing to a greater purpose. But if I'm utilizing my strengths within that environment, then I'm going to have that sense of greater contribution.
Yes. And you don't always know what our strengths are. Because strangely enough, I had to discover my strengths. And one of my strengths is talking in front of groups of people, which is not, and if you know anything about when I was younger, being dyslexic, having learning issues and various different things, my parents were taking drugs, etc. So we won't go into that now. But I had low self-esteem. I was very shy as a person. So to discover that actually I could engage with groups of people took commitment. It was a strange road I took. I took it through music. I found that I could perform in the band, be quite extroverted in front of a group, but be introverted off a group. And yes, but when I committed to that line of work, I kind of discovered my strength. So it's not always that you know what your strengths are.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this, I believe it was in the engagement episode, where we have to intentionally start exploring what our strengths are.
Yes,
because
that's right.
We're always inclined to look for what we need to improve, what we might be doing that we want to change,
Yep.
and don't often spend that time looking for our strengths. So maybe it's a longer process where you go about it a few ways, such as being a musician first, and
Yes.
but you can actually be intentional with it as well and start highlighting what your strengths are, and that may lead you to thinking about how you can start implementing them in your life more
Yes.
consistently. And again, when we're talking about this topic of meaning, how you might be able to implement your strengths into your work or into a hobby, or exploring new hobbies that might come up as a result of identifying those strengths.
Yes. Yeah, no, I see that. It's I came across a technique for teaching music, and I think I might have mentioned this already in engagement. Just to kind of recap. Whereas instead of focusing on what you do wrong, what you do, you focus on what you've done right. So you play something, you listen to it, and you think, what did I like about that? What notes work together? And you're focusing on what works rather than what's wrong. As you say, Miles, it's kind of one of those things, we're so used to focus on what's wrong and what we can't do that we sometimes miss the obvious, or what actually we need to focus on what works.
Yeah. And it's finding that balance between the two. Obviously, we still want to see what we might be doing wrong, so that we know what actions we want to do to improve. But also, in the grander scheme of things, we also want to encourage those topics that we've talked about within the PERMA model, such as positive emotions, where actually looking at what we've done right can help us feel more of those positive emotions. When we get onto accomplishments, it can help us feel more accomplished in what we're doing. So we want to find that balance between encouraging that positive thinking in terms of what's going right here, but then also allowing for that space to set in reality and still understanding what might be going wrong to improve. So starting to think about this topic of strengths and how we can apply them to the situation as well. So applying those strengths to improving what we're doing right even further, but also those strengths to what might be going wrong as well. So yeah, that balance between the two.
And I think it's really important to, because it's easy to do the things that are going wrong.
Yeah.
But also we can have, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, so bear with me.
We're in for the ride.
You're in for a ride. Sometimes, and the reason why we do want to focus on what goes, that's sometimes going wrong, etc., is that there seems to be a mechanism in us as human beings where our brain disguises a lot of what we do, and you have an image of how you think you produce something, you do something, you engage in the world around you, but your brain has mechanisms to actually make you think you're better than you are sometimes, and sometimes worse than you are. But the brain fools you, and it's not about reality, because we take the world in and the brain is interpreting what's happening around us. So just building on I think I was building on what you were saying there, that it's we have all these mechanisms in the brain that kind of fool us into thinking we're either better or worse than we actually are. And it's not focusing on reality, it's interpreting reality around us.
Yeah, so we're trying to change those thought patterns to encourage some of the focus on the strengths, as well as so just shifting that way of thinking. So when we bring this back to meaning, what meaning can actually do in those challenging situations where you might identify a lot of weaknesses, or it's just you're going through a difficult period. If you have that purpose behind what you're doing, then it's easier to overcome that challenges. You have the meaning to overcome those challenges, so you're able to deal with that adversity a lot easier, compared to if you were in a role where you didn't have any meaning behind it, and you come up against something that you're just like, I don't want to overcome this.
Well, it's that classic story, and I wasn't going to tell this, so I haven't got the details of it, but if you've come across it before, you'll know the details, and if you haven't, you'll get the gist of what I mean in it. So there was 3 bricklayers building this church. And the first bricklayer was asked, so why are you building a church? And it sort of says, because it's my job. So certain meaning to it, but not a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
And the second bricklayer was asked, why are you doing the bricklaying? And they sort of said, because it's reinforcing my faith, and I'm giving something back, and that gives more meaning to it. And the third bricklayer said, what are you building? Why are you laying the bricks? It's an expression of God itself. So if you're religious, that means a lot.
Yeah.
And that was the difference between different types of meaning that can be ascertained in anything that we do in life.
Yeah, and yeah, that goes back to, we've been talking a lot about work, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that your meaning comes from work. It could be from religion as well. So that's a good example of how that might be displayed. There's a greater, or there's the feeling of serving a greater purpose, and that comes from that religious aspect from that individual.
Yeah, and I think meaning comes in all sorts of forms. So one of the biggest things that happened to me is that I had children, and I was doing a job, and it was a job, but it wasn't a great job, let's say. I won't go into detail.
Don't talk about your musician years like that.
No, it wasn't the musician stuff. This was kind of the day job. And I wasn't fulfilled with it, and etc. And then I have my first child, and I thought, I want to be a role model. And then having children spurred me to become a musician, to set up my own business, and then to sort of build a consultancy company and a training company off the back of that. So sometimes it's external, and which gives purpose and meaning to your own life.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's very modest.
Your source of meaning can come from me as well.
Yeah, but you're not my only child, so okay.
I don't know where to go from
here. No. So we're tempted to define meaning. How would you put it in a couple of sentences?
So I'd say meaning is that feeling and sense that you're serving a greater purpose that aligns with your personal values.
Right. So how does that apply to somebody in sports, let's say?
Yeah, good question. So I was working with a volleyball team recently. I came into those sessions and there was discussion around how they were not gelling as a team. They were having issues off the court, on the court, and were not performing very well together. So one of the very first things that I done with them was to start to actually look at their values together as a team and what their personal values are, to try and align towards some team values. And the club had some really great values that, as a club, they said, these are our values, display them on the entranceway to the volleyball building that they were using. And I found it very interesting because my very first question to the group was, so what are your club's values? What do you align with?
Yes.
And they didn't know the values. So,
right, okay, that's a great start.
Yeah. So first of all, within sporting environments, within business environments as well, a lot of businesses lean on values as well. It's great to have values, but make sure that the message is implemented consistently within that setting. Yes. Otherwise you end up with situations like this volleyball team. So anyway, what we done, we sat down, we started talking about our values, and what I like to do with them is, or what I like to do with a sports team is do something called trash your values. So this is something that I learned from one of my mentors. It's really fun activity to do with teams. You can pre-provide a list of values, or you can have them come up with their own values. There's benefits to both. But you have them each individually highlight a few different values that they feel like is their strong personal values. Yep. And then they go around the room, share them with other teammates, and they're able to trash one of the other person's values. Apologize that this is very American terminology. But they trash one of their teammates' values until you end up with each of them have one each. And then you put them all up on the board and you start trashing them until you get down to a few key values that they have as a team, which may sound a bit harsh.
I was going to say. So if I get this right, so let's say I have a value of excellence.
Yeah.
So when you say trash it, what would you say to, and values are contextual as well. So excellence in engagement when I'm working with somebody.
Yeah.
How would you trash that?
So I should have gone back a step and clarified that I make it very clear that we're respecting each other's values. And when we say trash your values, it's just something that we're doing lightheartedly as friends.
So would it be are you challenging the value, or are you actually putting the value down to get a reaction?
So what I would be doing would be, say you had a list of a few, and excellence was one that I would say, I don't believe that this is a value that we should have as a team because I don't think it meets these key points. I feel like as a team, we should be considering this value and trying to.
That's a distinction that I think is worth making.
Yeah. So it's not just, that's gone. There's a discussion that happens because when we talk about meaning, bringing this back to meaning, there has to be that purpose behind it. So you want to bring that passion and that purpose behind why your list of values should be considered over that value. So ultimately, there's a big discussion that's happening around the team at the same time to get to that point where you have those key ones up on the board, and then that greater discussion happens as a group rather than individually, so that the aim is to get down to 3 or 4 key values that everybody can agree on, that these are the values we want to stand behind. We want them to represent our team.
That makes a lot more sense because when you challenge a value, because values to me are, so beliefs are near the surface awareness, conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Values are deeper in the unconscious, which often takes much more. If you're going to change a value, it's either something significant in life that happens, like moving away, going to university, etc., changes your values. It's a big thing in life.
Yeah.
Or they change over time slowly, where beliefs can change quite quickly.
Yeah, they're very deep set.
Yes.
So the purpose of the activity is to kind of push out any of the, sometimes when you're asked to identify your values, you're like, that one sounds like it might fit. You don't really always think about it deeply. So you're trying to encourage pushing those ones out of the discussion and having those core ones that really people are really passionate about and defending. And what you'll notice is they're talking about it with teammates, then the teammates like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that value. Actually, I do feel like that does represent me. And there's really that deeper level discussion. And then that happens at the team level as well, because we want those values to represent the team as a whole and not an individual on the team. Because again, in the sporting environment, we want that group connection.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because if you challenge a value that somebody holds dear, they will have an emotional response.
Yeah.
And whereas if we can go, also people have a lot of values, whether it's in work, at home, in families, that they just picked up from somebody. It's a word that they've heard that they think, I should add that value.
Yeah.
And you're challenging that. And if there's not an emotional, like, no, I will sword in the stone, this is my standing point, that's a value. If it's like, I kind of see your point, it doesn't have that same resonance.
Yeah.
And that way, that discussion is vital.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick note, if you're facilitating an activity like this, just be mindful that there might be some passionate expressions. So just to be aware of that and keep that under control. But obviously, you'll be working within your own team environment. So hopefully you do have an understanding. If you're coming from the outside, again, make sure that you're comfortable being in that situation and just ensuring that everyone is being respectful of each other.
Respect just a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so we identify these values with that volleyball team, and we came down to, I believe it was something like love was a core one.
Yes.
Now, when you're at this point, like I said, we don't want to just highlight a value and then just ignore it. But we've got it, great, and then it's just forgotten about. That message we want to consistently emphasize. So there's a few different ways you can do that. Obviously, having some artwork like the club did have around. And what I'd say is make sure it's in prominent areas, so not just in that entryway.
Yes.
Because you come in, you see it, but then you might forget about it by the time you're on the court. In their performance environment, again, if appropriate, if you're renting somewhere, you probably can't do it, but in their actual performance environment, if you can have it displayed around the room, it's just subtle reminders of what those values are. If you're coaching, you can emphasize certain values each month. So you might have a value of the month. Within practices, just highlight when you see love coming through. So for that volleyball team, it might be someone's made a mistake, their teammates support them rather than belittle them. So then you can emphasize, that was great, showcasing of our value of love. We share that within the team. And what I found with this particular volleyball team was, instead of being further apart from each other when they were performing, they started to grow a closer bond. They had those values to get behind, and with reinforcement of those messages over time, their performances improved because they had meaning behind why they were there together, rather than being these individuals that come into a team to perform.
Yes. And what I'm picking up from what you're saying there, which is a very formal way, isn't it? Saying something. And it hadn't gone unnoticed. You just brushed over my joke.
I thought the less said about that, the better.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So it's defining what a value means in the context that you're using it. So love defined in the context of the volleyball team is different from a romantic love. It's different from a love that you have for your family members. It's different from the love that you have for something that you do.
Yeah.
And then you go, values are demonstrated through action. So some sort of interaction. And how are we going to demonstrate it? Once we define what the value means in this context, what is it? How do we demonstrate that in a way that we act towards each other? So, and I think that's a great way, and not to be scared to use words like love within the context of life.
Yeah. And I think that's a great clarification, because often once we've identified them, I will have them come up as a definition, first of all, for that value for that team.
Yes.
Because like you said, it could mean different things in different contexts. We want to ensure that that definition is correct for that setting. Yes. And then again, that reinforcement, what behaviors demonstrate this? Can we highlight those? Can they identify those as well? How does that come out within their performance environment?
Yes. So values are contextual. They're drivers, and they show up through behavior. We've covered a lot in this session.
Yep.
So we did a recap of the PERMA model, and we've been talking about meaning. Mm-hmm. We had our wins of the week, and congratulations on your qualifications as being recognised as a sports psychologist. Yep. And
congratulations on having children. Was that what you were looking for?
No, I was actually recapping. So what was the next thing that we talked about?
Well, that technically was the next
thing. It was the next thing,
Yeah, so then we talked about how meaning is that greater sense of purpose.
Yes.
Comes through in different areas. So it could be work, it could be volunteering, could be religion, and how values lead into that. And we also discussed a little bit about strengths and weaknesses in there as well.
Yes.
Looking at how we can start to identify strengths a little bit more, because that can help us contribute towards that meaning when we're using our strengths.
Yes.
And that can give us that greater sense of purpose, because we're actively engaging in what we're doing well, or what we do well, and applying that into those settings as well.
Then you talked about the volleyball team. And how that you would trash values.
Yeah.
And how important it is to be careful around that, because values resonate with people. So once someone has a true value, it really means a lot. So if you challenge a value, they'll have an emotional response. And if it's a value they've just picked up or heard or think they should have, then actually they'll be willing to sort of like talk about it and engage with it. So it's a group discussion.
Yeah.
So it's a group dynamic to agree on, in this context, what does this value mean and how do we demonstrate it and the difference that made.
Yeah, and then once we've identified those values and that contributes to that sense of meaning within that sports team or whatever team setting that is, they have that shared sense of what they're working towards or what they believe in, and have that meaning behind what they're doing.
Yes, and all of this needs to be done with respect.
Yes, just a little bit.
Fabulous, thank you. So thank you for joining us this week, and until next time, adios.
I'll be the same.